Welcome to Wild Slumber, where tonight we drift through the twilight waters of consciousness itself, exploring one of nature's most elegant solutions to an impossible problem. Imagine, if you will, that you could never truly fall asleep, that every night, while half of your mind rested in darkness, the other half remained vigilantly awake, watching, listening, navigating through the world. Imagine never experiencing that complete surrender to unconsciousness that we humans know as sleep, that total letting go where all awareness dissolves into dreams and darkness. For dolphins, this isn't imagination, this is reality. This is every night, every rest period, every quiet moment in their aquatic world. Tonight, we're going to explore the secret inner lives of dolphins when they rest, a state so foreign to our human experience that it challenges everything we thought we knew about sleep, consciousness, and the very nature of what it means to dream. We'll discover why dolphins sleep with one eye literally open, why they may never experience the vivid dreams that fill our own nights, and what their unique form of rest reveals about the relationship between brain, mind, and awareness. The ocean doesn't pause for sleep. It offers no solid ground to lie upon, no burrow to retreat into, no branch to perch upon safely through the night. And for dolphins, creatures who breathe air but live surrounded by water, this presents an elegant paradox. How do you sleep when sleeping could mean drowning? How do you rest when rest could mean death? Let us begin. The discovery of half sleep. The first hints of something unusual about dolphin sleep came not from rigorous scientific study, but from simple observation. In the early 1960s, a controversial neuroscientist named John Lilly was conducting research on dolphin intelligence at his laboratory in the Virgin Islands. Lilly was interested in many things: dolphin communication, their remarkable brains, the possibility of interspecies dialogue. But one observation kept nagging at him, something so odd that it didn't quite fit into any of his grander theories. The dolphins never seemed fully asleep. Oh, they rested certainly. They became quieter, less active, floated near the surface, or drifted slowly through their tanks. But there was always something alert about them. Always one eye watching, always that sense of partial awareness. And their breathing never became automatic, never slipped into the unconscious rhythm that marks our own descent into deep sleep. Each breath seemed deliberate, conscious, chosen. Lilly made a curious note in his research journals, one that would prove more prescient than he could have known at the time. He observed that dolphins appeared to sleep with one eye closed and one eye open. He speculated, and this is where his insight truly shone, that perhaps this wasn't just a quirky behavioral tic. Perhaps it reflected something profound happening inside the dolphin's brain. Perhaps, he suggested, they were maintaining some level of waking awareness, even during sleep, always scanning their environment with at least half of their sensory inputs. This observation, casual as it seemed, opened a door to understanding one of the most remarkable adaptations in the mammalian world. The breakthrough came in the mid-1970s from an unlikely source: Soviet researchers working in Moscow. Lev Mukhametov and his colleagues at the Sevetsov Institute of Ecology and Evolution had access to captive dolphins, and more importantly, the technology to peer inside their brains while they slept. They used electroencephalography, EEG for short, which measures the electrical activity of the brain through electrodes placed on the skull. What they discovered was nothing short of revolutionary. When most mammals sleep, including humans, the EEG shows characteristic patterns. During deep sleep, our brain waves become slow and synchronized. Great rolling waves of electrical activity washing across both hemispheres of the brain at once. This is called slow wave sleep, and it's unmistakable on an EEG readout. Both sides of our brain enter this state together, like two dancers moving in perfect synchrony. But when Mukhamatov's team looked at the EEG patterns from sleeping dolphins, they saw something that shouldn't have been possible. One hemisphere of the brain would show those characteristic, slow, synchronized waves of deep sleep, while the other hemisphere displayed the fast, desynchronized activity typical of waking consciousness. It was as if half the dolphin's brain was sound asleep, while the other half was wide awake, alert, processing information from the environment. And here's where Lily's earlier observation found its neurological confirmation. When the left hemisphere was asleep, the dolphin's right eye remained closed. When the right hemisphere slept, the left eye stayed shut. The open eye, connected to the awake hemisphere through crossed neural pathways, maintained visual vigilance. The dolphin was quite literally sleeping with one eye open. The researchers called this phenomenon unihemispheric slow wave sleep, USWS for short. Unihemispheric meaning one hemisphere, indicating that only one half of the brain sleeps at a time. And over the following years, as Mukhamatov and his colleagues studied more dolphins, more cetacean species, the pattern held: bottlenose dolphins, belugas, Amazonian river dolphins, pilot whales. Every species they examined showed this same remarkable splitting of consciousness. Imagine what this means for a moment. Imagine your brain dividing its states of consciousness, spatially rather than temporally. Instead of your whole brain cycling between waking and sleeping, what if your left brain slept while your right brain stayed awake, then switched? What would that feel like? Would you experience it as being half asleep? Or would the awake hemisphere maintain a kind of diminished but complete consciousness? These are questions that cut to the heart of what consciousness itself means, and we'll return to them later. But first, we need to understand the mechanics of this extraordinary adaptation. The Soviet research team didn't stop at merely describing this phenomenon. They wanted to understand it, to probe its limits and functions. They conducted experiments that reveal the depth of this hemispheric independence. They would wake sleeping dolphins by stimulating one hemisphere electrically, and found that the intensity required to wake the dolphin was much higher when the stimulation targeted the sleeping hemisphere compared to the awake one. Each hemisphere truly was in a different state of consciousness. They monitored this sleep pattern continuously over days and found that the dolphins didn't catch up by sleeping both hemispheres at once later. The sleep debt, if there was such a thing, accumulated independently in each hemisphere. If you deprived only the left hemisphere of sleep, only the left hemisphere would show increased sleep drive afterward. The right hemisphere would carry on normally. It was as if each half of the brain had its own separate need for rest, its own accounting of sleep debt. And perhaps most remarkably, they almost never saw anything resembling what we call REM sleep. REM, rapid eye movement sleep, is a state during which most of our vivid dreaming occurs. In humans and other terrestrial mammals, it's characterized by rapid movements of the eyes, temporary paralysis of major muscle groups, and a peculiar paradox. The EEG looks almost like waking consciousness, yet the sleeper is deeply unconscious, lost in the theater of dreams. In dolphins, this state seemed to be absent entirely, or so rare as to be essentially non-existent. There were occasional muscle jerks and twitches during rest, behaviors that superficially resembled REM sleep phenomena. But the full suite of REM characteristics, the unmistakable electrographic signature, never appeared. And this absence raised a profound question. If dolphins don't have REM sleep, do they dream? That question would haunt researchers for decades, and its answer, or rather its persistent lack of a clear answer, remains one of the great mysteries of marine mammal neuroscience. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can explore the nature of dolphin dreams or their absence, we need to understand exactly how this half-sleeping, half-waking state actually works at a neurological level. The mechanics of unihemispheric sleep. Sleep, for most mammals, is orchestrated by a complex interplay of neural circuits distributed throughout the brain. Deep in the brainstem, in the hypothalamus, in networks of neurons scattered across various structures, chemical signals rise and fall in daily rhythms, pulling us down into sleep or pushing us up into wakefulness. These aren't random processes. They're as precisely regulated as a Swiss watch, driven by neurotransmitters, those chemical messengers that neurons use to communicate with each other. For dolphins, this system has been modified in ways that still puzzle neuroscientists. The basic machinery is the same. They have the same neurotransmitter systems we do, the same fundamental brain structures, but the wiring has been rewired, the controls have been lateralized, split between the two hemispheres in a way that allows for independent operation. One of the key players in this system is acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter strongly associated with wakefulness and attention. In most mammals, acetylcholine floods through the cortex evenly during waking, bathing both hemispheres equally. During sleep, those levels drop. But in dolphins experiencing USWS, something different happens. Researchers studying northern fur seals, which also exhibit unihemispheric sleep in water, implanted special monitoring equipment and discovered that acetylcholine release is lateralized. The hemisphere showing slow-wave sleep receives minimal acetylcholine, while the hemisphere with waking EEG patterns gets the full dose. It's as if there's a valve that can direct the flow of this wakefulness chemical to one side of the brain or the other. Another crucial neurotransmitter is noradrenaline. This chemical is associated with arousal, alertness, and stress responses. In dolphins during USWS, noradrenaline secretion is asymmetric. The awake hemisphere shows high levels of noradrenaline, which drives continuous neural firing and maintains alertness. The sleeping hemisphere receives very little. And here's where things get really interesting. The continuous discharge of noradrenaline in the awake hemisphere stimulates heat production. Researchers monitoring brain temperature in sleeping dolphins discovered that the awake hemisphere maintains a higher but stable temperature compared to the sleeping side. The sleeping hemisphere actually cools down slightly, not dramatically, just by a few tenths of a degree Celsius, but measurably. This temperature difference appears to play a role in regulating the transition between sleeping and waking states. When the cooled hemisphere begins to warm again, it signals a shift back toward wakefulness. This makes sense when you consider the challenges dolphins face in their environment. The ocean is cold. Water conducts heat away from the body 90 times faster than air at the same temperature. For a mammal whose brain must be maintained at a stable 37 degrees Celsius to function properly, this represents a serious challenge. By keeping one hemisphere of the brain constantly awake and warm through metabolic activity, dolphins can maintain brain function and compensate for heat loss to the surrounding water. In fact, some researchers have proposed that this need for brain thermogenesis, heat generation, may have been a primary evolutionary driver for the development of such large brains in cetaceans. About 32 million years ago, global ocean temperatures dropped dramatically. Ancient cetaceans faced a choice: adapt to the colder waters or go extinct. Those that survived developed, among other adaptations, brains with enhanced thermogenic capabilities. The large cetacean brain, this theory suggests, isn't primarily for enhanced cognition. It's a biological furnace, generating the heat necessary to prevent hypothermia in icy seas. Whether or not this controversial hypothesis is correct, the thermal management system is undeniably sophisticated. The cetacean brain is packed with an unusually high number of glial cells, supportive cells that, among other functions, help with heat production. And the unihemispheric sleep pattern itself, by ensuring that at least half the brain is always metabolically active, maintains a baseline of heat generation even during rest periods. But how do the two hemispheres coordinate this remarkable dance of sleeping and waking? How does the brain know when to switch, which side is asleep? The answer lies partly in structures deep within the brain, particularly in what's called the posterior commissure. This is a bundle of nerve fibers that crosses from one side of the brain to the other, like a bridge connecting the two hemispheres. In dolphins and other cetaceans, the posterior commissure is exceptionally large compared to terrestrial mammals. Researchers believe this enlarged structure helps coordinate the interhemispheric communication necessary for USWS, allowing inhibitory signals to pass from one hemisphere to the other, essentially telling one side, "You can sleep now," while the other side stays on duty. Mathematical models of dolphin sleep suggest that specialized nuclei in the hypothalamus, specifically the ventrolateral preoptic nuclei on each side, exchange messages that regulate when each hemisphere enters slow-wave sleep. It's as if there are two sleep centers, one in each hemisphere, that can negotiate between themselves. "I'll stay awake while you rest, then we'll switch." The switching itself happens gradually over the course of a sleep episode. On average, in bottlenose dolphins studied in captivity, a single hemisphere will remain in slow-wave sleep for about 42 minutes, though episodes can range from just 3.5 minutes to over 2 hours. Over the course of a day, dolphins experience anywhere from 2 to 12 sleep episodes per hemisphere, adding up to about 5 episodes per side on average. And critically, the total amount of sleep is distributed almost equally between the two hemispheres. If the left hemisphere gets 6 hours of slow-wave sleep in a 24-hour period, the right hemisphere will get approximately the same amount. This equal distribution is fascinating because it suggests that the sleep need, whatever function sleep is serving, applies independently to each hemisphere. They each have their own books, balance, their own need for that mysterious restorative process we call sleep. Bottlenose dolphins, based on these studies, spend about 33% of their day sleeping, roughly 8 hours out of 24. But here's the twist: because they're only sleeping one hemisphere at a time, they're also, in a sense, awake for 100% of the day. One hemisphere is always conscious, always monitoring, always responsive to the environment. This becomes even more remarkable when you consider dolphin mothers with newborn calves. In one of the most extraordinary sleep studies ever conducted, researchers observed that both mothers and their newborn calves showed essentially no typical sleep behavior for the first month after birth. They swam continuously, day and night, with minimal or no eye closure, no floating behavior, none of the usual signs of rest. The mothers weren't sleeping, the calves weren't sleeping. They were in a state of continuous, vigilant wakefulness for weeks on end. This finding sent shockwaves through sleep research. In every other mammal studied, newborns sleep extensively. Human babies, rat pups, puppies, kittens, all sleep far more than adults, presumably because sleep plays some critical role in development. Yet here were dolphin calves, swimming alongside their mothers with barely a moment of rest, and they were developing normally. No cognitive deficits, no health problems, no signs of the catastrophic consequences that would follow if you tried to keep a human infant awake for weeks. The mothers gradually increased their sleep time back to normal levels over several months, but they never went through a period of sleep rebound, that intense, prolonged sleep that usually follows sleep deprivation. It was as if the continuous wakefulness, while unusual, wasn't creating a sleep debt in the way it would for a terrestrial mammal. So why do they do this? Why do mothers and newborns forgo sleep during those vulnerable first weeks? The answer is almost certainly predation. A newborn dolphin calf is clumsy, uncoordinated, and utterly dependent on its mother. It must surface to breathe every few seconds. It can't swim strongly enough to escape predators. And in many parts of the ocean, sharks patrol constantly, waiting for exactly this kind of vulnerability. By maintaining continuous vigilance and movement, mothers keep their calves safe during this most dangerous period. The calf swims in what's called the echelon position, right alongside the mother, using her slipstream to conserve energy, and neither can afford the risk of true unconsciousness. This brings us to the larger question: what exactly is unihemispheric sleep for? Why did this extraordinary adaptation evolve? Why dolphins sleep this way? The most obvious answer, the one that occurred even to early observers like John Lilly, is breathing. Dolphins are voluntary breathers. Every single breath they take is a conscious decision. There's no autonomic breathing reflex that continues when they're unconscious, the way it does for us. If a dolphin were to fall into the deep, unconscious sleep that we experience, it would simply stop breathing, and within minutes it would drown. This isn't just speculation. When dolphins are given anesthesia for medical procedures, they must be carefully ventilated, with researchers manually ensuring the air enters their lungs. Without that intervention, the unconscious dolphin would asphyxiate. Their respiratory control centers, unlike ours, don't maintain that automatic breathing drive during unconsciousness. So unihemispheric sleep solves an existential problem. With one hemisphere, always awake. There's always part of the brain monitoring the need to breathe, conscious enough to drive that journey to the surface, to open the blowhole, to exchange air. The awake hemisphere maintains not just respiratory awareness, but also the motor control necessary for the dolphin to swim, albeit slowly and deliberately during its rest periods. But breathing alone doesn't fully explain USWS. After all, seals face the same respiratory challenge. True seals, the earliest seals like harbor seals and elephant seals, have to surface to breathe just as dolphins do. Yet when these seals have been studied with EEG monitoring, they show normal, bilateral, slow-wave sleep. Both hemispheres sleep together. They're capable of holding their breath for remarkably long periods, even during deep sleep, surfacing to breathe without fully waking. And when true seals sleep on land, where there's no drowning risk, they still don't show unihemispheric sleep. They sleep normally. So there's something else going on with dolphins, something beyond just the need to control breathing. Thermoregulation is almost certainly part of the answer. As we discussed earlier, maintaining brain temperature in cold water is a significant challenge, and having one hemisphere continuously active and generating heat helps address that. But let's go deeper into this, because the thermogenic story is more complex than it first appears. Research into the cetacean brain has revealed some remarkable specializations. The neurons in dolphin cortex show unusual expression of certain proteins, specifically uncoupling proteins, or UCPs. These proteins are found in mitochondria, the power plants of cells, where they normally help produce chemical energy. But uncoupling proteins have a special function. They dissipate the energy gradient that drives ATP production, releasing that energy as heat instead. They're biological heaters. In most mammals, these proteins are found mainly in specialized fat tissue called brown fat, where they serve to generate heat in cold conditions. But in dolphins, UCPs appear in much broader distribution throughout the brain, not just in a few specialized cells, but throughout the cortex, in neurons, and in those abundant glial cells we mentioned earlier. The cetacean brain, it seems, is specifically adapted to be a thermogenic organ. And there's more. The awake hemisphere, pumping out noradrenaline, produces more heat than it would at rest. The sleeping hemisphere, cooled and metabolically quieter, reduces its energy demand. This asymmetry allows dolphins to maintain overall brain function while managing their thermal budget more efficiently than if both hemispheres were fully active all the time. They can rest and recover while still keeping the furnace burning. This thermogenic hypothesis has been controversial, but it's gained considerable support. It helps explain why cetaceans evolved such large brains around 32 million years ago, right when ocean temperatures dropped. It wasn't primarily about getting smarter, though enhanced cognitive capabilities may have been a beneficial side effect. It was about survival in a thermal challenge that their terrestrial ancestors had never faced. Now let's consider predation and vigilance. The ocean is not a safe place. For dolphins, particularly young ones, the threat of sharks is ever present. In some studied populations, more than 70% of non-calf dolphins show shark bite scars on their bodies. These aren't gentle nips, they're evidence of life or death encounters. And the most vulnerable individuals by far are calves. Young dolphins who haven't yet developed the strength, speed, or group coordination that adults use to avoid or fend off predators. Unihemispheric sleep allows continuous environmental monitoring. The open eye connected to the awake hemisphere maintains visual vigilance, but even more importantly, dolphins can echolocate continuously while sleeping. Echolocation, that remarkable biological sonar that allows dolphins to see with sound by emitting clicks and interpreting the returning echoes, remains functional during USWS. The awake hemisphere can process the clicks being sent out and the echoes returning, building a sound picture of the environment even while the other hemisphere rests. Studies have shown that dolphins can maintain this vigilant echolocation behavior for extraordinary periods. In one remarkable experiment, 2 dolphins were trained to detect and report targets using echolocation. The researchers then had them perform this task continuously for 5 days straight. Not occasional checks, continuous monitoring, day and night for 5 full days. The dolphins maintained their performance throughout, showing no significant decline in accuracy. When the experiment was extended to 15 days for one particularly dedicated dolphin, she continued to perform reliably. 15 days of continuous vigilance. Imagine staying alert, actively monitoring your surroundings for over 2 weeks without interruption. For a terrestrial mammal, this would be impossible. Sleep deprivation would cause cognitive collapse within days, but for dolphins, with their unihemispheric sleep, this level of sustained attention appears to be well within their capabilities. They can rest and remain vigilant simultaneously. This vigilance serves multiple purposes. It allows dolphins to maintain contact with their social groups. Dolphins are highly social animals, living in complex, fluid societies. Pod members need to keep track of each other, maintain cohesion, coordinate movements and activities. The open eye of a sleeping dolphin often points toward other pod members, suggesting that even during rest, they're monitoring their companions' locations and activities. It also allows for anti-predator scanning. The most vulnerable time for any animal is during sleep, when reaction times are slow and awareness is diminished. By never allowing both hemispheres to sleep simultaneously, dolphins eliminate this window of maximum vulnerability. There's always one hemisphere awake, ready to detect danger and coordinate an escape response. But there's another factor we shouldn't overlook: the sheer physics of being a mammal in water. Dolphins are denser than water. If they stopped swimming, they would sink. Some larger cetaceans, like sperm whales, have been observed sleeping vertically, hanging in the water column like strange biological submarines, presumably at a depth where their buoyancy naturally balances out. But most dolphins are too small for this strategy. They need to maintain at least minimal swimming movements to stay properly positioned in the water, to maintain horizontal orientation, to avoid drifting into dangerous areas. During USWS, dolphins often engage in what's called logging, floating at the surface like a log, rising and falling gently with the waves. But even this seemingly passive state requires some motor control. They must keep the blowhole above water. They must maintain appropriate posture. These demands, small as they seem, require motor coordination that would be impossible if both hemispheres were deeply asleep. Some dolphins exhibit slow, continuous swimming during sleep, circling lazily in one direction. Interestingly, the direction of swimming doesn't depend on which hemisphere is awake. They don't turn right when the right brain is awake and left when the left brain is awake. The motor patterns for this kind of steady swimming appear to be so well established that either hemisphere can maintain them. It's somewhat like how we can walk while thinking about something else. The basic motor program runs almost automatically, requiring only minimal conscious oversight. So the reasons for unihemispheric sleep are multiple and interconnected. Breathing control, thermoregulation, predator vigilance, social monitoring, motor coordination. Each factor alone might not be sufficient to drive such a radical adaptation, but together they created evolutionary pressure strong enough to fundamentally rewire how the cetacean brain handles that most universal of mammalian needs, the need for sleep. And yet, all of this brings us back to a question that gnaws at the edges of our understanding. If sleep is primarily about rest and restoration, about clearing away the metabolic wastes of a day's neural activity, about consolidating memories and maintaining synaptic health, then how can dolphins manage with only half their brain sleeping at a time? Shouldn't each hemisphere be perpetually under-rested, perpetually compromised? The evidence suggests otherwise. Dolphins in captivity, where they can be observed closely and where their cognitive abilities can be tested, show no signs of chronic sleep deprivation. They learn complex tasks readily. They remember training sequences over long periods. They perform sophisticated cognitive feats, responding to intricate grammatical instructions, demonstrating numerical understanding, showing evidence of self-awareness. Their memory is excellent. Their problem-solving is creative. By every measure we can devise, they appear to be functioning at a high cognitive level, despite sleeping only one hemisphere at a time. Perhaps then, sleep does for each hemisphere individually what it does for the whole brain in other mammals. Perhaps the restorative processes, whatever they are, operate locally rather than globally. Each hemisphere takes its turn resting, clearing out cellular debris, stabilizing synapses, processing the day's experiences. And because the two hemispheres can alternate, neither falls too far behind in its housekeeping. Or perhaps the reduced sleep time. Remember, dolphins average about 8 hours of sleep per 24-hour period, but each hemisphere only gets about 4 hours is sufficient because the sleep is so efficient, uninterrupted by the complexity of REM cycles, focused entirely on slow-wave sleep. Maybe each hemisphere can accomplish in 4 hours what takes our brains 8 hours to complete. These are questions that researchers continue to grapple with, but they pale in comparison to the truly deep mystery of dolphin sleep, a mystery that takes us into the shadowy realm of dreams, the mystery of dolphin dreams. Do dolphins dream? It's a simple question with profound implications. To answer it, we first need to understand what we mean by dreaming and how we recognize it in non-human animals. In humans, dreaming is most strongly associated with REM sleep, that peculiar state where the brain is electrically active, almost indistinguishable from waking on an EEG, yet we're deeply unconscious and experiencing vivid hallucinations we call dreams. During REM, our eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids. Our major muscle groups are temporarily paralyzed, and our heart rate and breathing become irregular. The paralysis appears to be a safety mechanism, preventing us from acting out our dreams. from physically responding to the phantom experiences unfolding in our minds. When researchers discovered REM sleep in the 1950s, they found it in every mammal they studied. It seemed to be a universal feature of mammalian sleep. Cats, dogs, rats, elephants all showed this distinctive sleep stage. In most mammals, the night alternates between periods of slow wave sleep and briefer periods of REM, cycling back and forth in a fairly predictable rhythm. But dolphins, as we've already noted, show little to no REM sleep, despite decades of observation and EEG recording in multiple species. Bottlenose dolphins, belugas, pilot whales, Amazonian river dolphins, researchers have found essentially no unequivocal REM episodes. There have been occasional ambiguous findings, brief moments that might have been REM, but nothing consistent, nothing that approaches the clear-cut REM periods seen in terrestrial mammals. However, behavioral observations complicate the picture. Researchers watching sleeping dolphins, both in captivity and in the wild, have documented something intriguing: muscle jerks and body twitches. These occur most frequently during rest periods, particularly at night and in early morning. Sometimes the jerks come in series, one after another, accompanied by slight eye movements. Often, after a series of jerks, the dolphin briefly arouses, as if waking from something. These behaviors are reminiscent of REM sleep phenomena in other mammals. When a sleeping dog twitches and whimpers, and its paws move as if running, we assume it's dreaming. The muscle activity leaks through the partial paralysis of REM, giving us a window into the dream experience. Could the same be true for dolphins? Could these jerks and twitches be the visible surface of a dream state happening beneath? The problem is that these behaviors in dolphins aren't accompanied by the characteristic EEG patterns of REM sleep. The brain activity doesn't match, and the jerks occur at odd times, sometimes at the beginning of rest periods, sometimes during apparent waking, not in the regular cycles you'd expect if they were part of a normal sleep architecture. One hypothesis is that dolphins have a modified form of REM sleep, so brief or so different from terrestrial mammalian REM that it escapes detection with current methods. After all, birds have REM sleep, but their REM episodes are extremely short, sometimes lasting only a few seconds. Could dolphins have something similar? Micro-REMs perhaps, scattered through their rest periods, too brief for an observer to catch without continuous, high-resolution monitoring. Another possibility, suggested by some researchers, is that whatever function REM sleep serves in other mammals, dolphins accomplish through different mechanisms. Remember that one hypothesis about REM's function is that it serves to warm the brain after the cooling that occurs during slow wave sleep. In terrestrial mammals, both hemispheres cool during slow wave sleep, then both are rewarmed during REM before waking. But in dolphins, one hemisphere is always awake and warm. There's no need for a global brain rewarming event. The temperature gradient is managed continuously through the alternation of hemispheric activity. If REM is primarily about thermoregulation rather than dreaming, and this is admittedly a controversial idea, then dolphins might not need it. They've solved the temperature problem differently. The absence of REM wouldn't mean the absence of dreamlike cognitive processing. It would just mean they don't need that particular physiological state to accomplish their neural housekeeping. But here's where things get really interesting. Some pinnipeds Close relatives of cetaceans in the marine mammal family show a remarkable pattern. Northern fur seals, which are capable of USWS when sleeping in water, have been studied extensively. On land, these seals sleep like typical mammals, both hemispheres together, with clear REM periods making up about 7% of their sleep time. They dream, at least in the sense of having REM sleep, with all its characteristic features. But when these same seals sleep in water, using USWS, their REM sleep almost completely disappears. It drops to about 1% of sleep time, only 1/7 of what they experience on land. And even that minimal REM is dramatically shortened, with episodes lasting less than 2 minutes, compared to the much longer REM periods they enjoy on dry ground. So these are animals that can switch between modes: land mode, bilateral sleep with ample REM, water mode, USWS with suppressed REM. They're effectively demonstrating that REM sleep is incompatible with the demands of sleeping in an aquatic environment where you must maintain breathing control and motor coordination. And here's the crucial point. Despite going without substantial REM sleep for extended periods in water, sometimes days or weeks during breeding seasons when they remain at sea, these fur seals show no signs of cognitive impairment. No REM rebound when they return to land and resume normal bilateral sleep. No evidence that the absence of REM caused any damage or deficit. They just get on with life. This finding has profound implications for our understanding of what REM sleep is actually for. If animals can do without it for extended periods without ill effects, perhaps it's not as essential as once thought. Perhaps, as the dolphin and fur seal data suggest, whatever functions REM serves can be accomplished by other means, at least in animals adapted to aquatic life. But all of this still leaves our original question unanswered. Do dolphins dream? If we define dreaming strictly as the experience occurring during REM sleep, then probably not, or at least not in the way humans and other terrestrial mammals dream. But that definition might be too narrow. Many humans report dream experiences during non-REM sleep as well. Less vivid, perhaps, more thought-like than hallucinatory, but still experiences of imagined scenarios and narratives unfolding during sleep. And we have no way of knowing if these non-REM dreams might be more prevalent in animals that lack substantial REM periods. Consider what we know about dolphin cognition when they're awake. They have sophisticated memories. They can recall events from years past. They recognize individuals they haven't seen in decades. They learn complex sequences and can imagine variations on trained behaviors. They show evidence of planning, of anticipating future events, of holding mental representations of objects that aren't present. In other words, they have rich inner mental lives, full of memories and imaginings. When a dolphin rests with one hemisphere in slow wave sleep, what's happening in that sleeping hemisphere? Is it simply offline, dark, blank? Or could there be some form of mentation occurring, some processing of memories and experiences that, while not matching the vivid hallucinations of REM dreams, nonetheless constitutes a kind of dream state? We have no way of knowing. The subjective experience of another species is forever beyond our direct access. We can measure brainwaves and observe behaviors, but we cannot feel what a dolphin feels or experience what a dolphin experiences. The question of whether they dream remains perhaps necessarily suspended in that space of intriguing uncertainty. What we can say is this: if dolphins dream, their dreams must be fundamentally different from ours. Our dreams are unified experiences, singular narratives, however bizarre, that involve our whole consciousness. But a sleeping dolphin has half its brain asleep and half awake. If the sleeping hemisphere experiences anything dreamlike, it's divorced from the ongoing awareness of the waking hemisphere. There's no unified consciousness experiencing the dream. The dream, if it exists, would be unknown even to the rest of the dolphin's own mind, unless, and here we enter even deeper philosophical waters, unless each hemisphere has its own independent consciousness, unless a dolphin, in some sense, is two minds sharing one body. When one hemisphere sleeps, perhaps that particular mind half enters its own private dream world, while the other mind half continues to experience the waking world of water, light, and sound. And they take turns switching off, each getting its chance at both waking experience and dream experience, but never experiencing them simultaneously in an integrated way. This leads us into territory that challenges our most basic assumptions about what it means to be a conscious being. Life without full sleep. What does it feel like to never fully lose consciousness? To never experience that complete dissolution of awareness that we humans know as deep sleep? For most of us, that descent into unconsciousness is a daily reprieve. It's a letting go, a surrender to darkness, a temporary vacation from the burden of being aware. Our dreams may trouble us or delight us, but even in dreams we're not maintaining vigilance, not monitoring the environment, not making deliberate decisions about survival. We're in another world entirely, one that might feel real in the moment but bears no practical relationship to our physical well-being. Dolphins never have that luxury. Even in their deepest rest, half their mind is awake, aware, responsive, monitoring for threats, maintaining breathing, tracking their location in the water, staying with their pod. They never get to truly check out. There's always part of them on duty. For newborn calves, this vigilance is taken to extremes that would destroy any human infant. Remember those observations of dolphin mothers and calves in the first weeks after birth? Continuous swimming, minimal eye closure, essentially no typical sleep behavior for an entire month. The mother and calf, both, swimming endlessly through the water, day and night, week after week. The reasons for this, as we discussed, relate to vulnerability. A newborn dolphin is incredibly helpless. Its dorsal fin and tail flukes are pliable, not yet stiffened enough for efficient swimming. It hasn't learned to coordinate its movements well. It has to surface, to breathe every 20 to 30 seconds. Its echolocation is undeveloped, leaving it essentially blind to the underwater world that adult dolphins navigate so precisely. Even its buoyancy control is poor, making it difficult to maintain stable position in the water column. And all of this makes it perfect prey. Sharks are opportunistic, and a clumsy, slow-swimming calf represents an easy meal. The only defense a calf has is its mother's vigilance and the protection of being constantly in motion, constantly in the mother's slipstream, never drifting too far or becoming isolated. So the mother doesn't sleep, not in any meaningful way. She continues swimming, and the calf, with an innate following response, tracks her movements, using her wake to ease its own swimming efforts. This echelon swimming, as it's called, serves multiple purposes. It helps the calf keep up with the mother's speed, using hydrodynamics to offset its own weakness. It maintains physical proximity. And perhaps most crucially, it means the mother always knows exactly where her calf is. She doesn't have to search for it, doesn't have to worry it's drifted away. It's right there beside her, always. The fascinating thing is that this doesn't seem to harm either mother or calf. When researchers monitored stress hormones in dolphin mothers during this period of extended wakefulness, they found normal levels. The mothers weren't showing physiological signs of stress, and the calves developed normally, hitting all their developmental milestones right on schedule. Learning to swim properly, learning to echolocate, learning to nurse efficiently, growing at healthy rates. By every measure, they were thriving despite their lack of sleep. This finding rattled sleep researchers. The conventional wisdom, based on decades of research in terrestrial mammals, was that sleep, particularly in early development, is absolutely essential. Deprive a rat pup of sleep, and it will show developmental delays. Human infants sleep 16 to 18 hours a day, and that sleep appears crucial for brain development. Sleep deprivation in human babies leads to irritability, poor feeding, and developmental concerns. Yet here were dolphin calves, getting essentially no sleep for weeks, and they were fine. How? One possibility is that they're not actually sleep deprived in the way a terrestrial mammal would be. Remember that unihemispheric sleep allows rest without complete unconsciousness. Perhaps even during these periods of continuous swimming, the dolphin mothers and calves are taking micro naps with one hemisphere at a time. Brief episodes too short to detect through behavioral observation, but enough to provide some restorative benefit. The lack of bilateral eye closure doesn't necessarily mean the absence of all sleep. Each hemisphere might be grabbing moments of rest whenever it can, cycling through brief periods of slow wave activity while the other hemisphere maintains vigilance. Another possibility is that dolphin brains are simply more resilient to the effects of sleep deprivation. Their neurons might be better at managing metabolic waste without the deep cleaning that sleep normally provides. Their synapses might be more stable, less dependent on sleep to maintain proper function. Natural selection, operating over millions of years of aquatic life, might have favored those individuals whose brains could function well despite reduced or fragmented sleep. Or perhaps, and this is intriguing, the calf is learning even in these periods of continuous swimming. For a dolphin, unlike a terrestrial mammal, swimming isn't an optional skill to be learned later. It's immediately necessary for survival. A calf that can't swim properly will drown or be eaten. So perhaps that continuous early swimming, tiring as it must be, is also developmental training. The calf's nervous system is learning motor coordination, building the neural circuits for efficient swimming in real time and under the pressure of genuine survival need. Once the most vulnerable first weeks pass, dolphin mothers gradually increase the amount of time they spend resting. Their sleep returns toward normal levels over the following months. But interestingly, they never show sleep rebound, that intense, prolonged sleep that typically follows sleep deprivation in other mammals. It's as if those weeks of reduced sleep didn't create a sleep debt that needed to be repaid. They simply resume normal sleep patterns and move on. Adult dolphins, living in less vulnerable circumstances, maintain their unihemispheric sleep more or less indefinitely, They spend roughly a third of each day in slow-wave sleep states, with the time divided equally between hemispheres. This amounts to about 4 hours of actual sleep per hemisphere per 24-hour period, less than what a terrestrial mammal of similar size would require. And yet they perform cognitive feats that rival or exceed those of many fully rested terrestrial mammals. Dolphin memory is exceptional. A dolphin can remember the signature whistle, that unique vocal identifier, of another dolphin it hasn't seen in 20 years. That's the longest demonstrated social memory in any non-human species. They can learn complex grammatical structures, responding correctly to instructions built from sequences of gestures that specify not just what to do, but the order in which to do it. They can imitate behaviors they've never been trained to perform, both the behaviors of other dolphins and those of humans. They show evidence of metacognition, thinking about thinking, recognizing when they don't know something and acting accordingly. In studies of vigilance and attention, dolphins have proven capable of maintaining performance on detection tasks for days on end. In one remarkable experiment, a dolphin named Sei maintained echolocation vigilance, detecting and reporting targets for 15 consecutive days. That's 360 hours of continuous attention to a task. And not only did she maintain this vigilance, but her accuracy remained high throughout. No catastrophic decline in performance, no signs of fatigue-induced errors accumulating over time. She just kept going. For comparison, human performance on sustained attention tasks begins to decline noticeably after just a few hours. Keep us awake for 24 hours straight, and our reaction times slow, our accuracy drops. We make increasingly frequent mistakes. Keep us awake for several days, and we begin to experience micro-sleeps. Brief moments where we essentially lose consciousness for a second or two. Our brains stealing fragments of sleep wherever they can, continue much longer, and we experience hallucinations, severe cognitive impairment, potentially life-threatening physiological breakdown. Dolphins appear immune to these effects, or rather, they never experience them because they're never truly fully awake or fully asleep. One hemisphere is always resting, even while the other works. It's a different strategy for managing the need for rest, spreading it across space and time in a way that allows continuous functionality. The implications are profound. Sleep researchers have long debated the functions of sleep. Why do we need it? What crucial processes occur during those hours of unconsciousness that can't occur during waking? The answers have remained elusive, partly because every mammal studied needed sleep, and sleep deprivation caused problems. But dolphins suggest that whatever sleep does, it can be done piecewise, hemisphere by hemisphere, without requiring global unconsciousness. Perhaps sleep's functions are local rather than global. Perhaps each region of the brain needs periodic downtime for maintenance, but they don't all need it simultaneously. Dolphins might be showing us that sleep is more like a rotating maintenance schedule in a factory. You shut down and service each section in turn, but you never shut down the whole factory at once. Or perhaps there's something fundamentally different about how dolphin brains are built that makes them less dependent on sleep. Their unusually high glia to neuron ratio, their specialized thermogenic systems, their unique cortical organization. These differences might support brain function in ways that reduce the need for prolonged, unconscious rest. Whatever the explanation, dolphins are living proof that mammals can thrive with sleep patterns radically different from our own. They challenge our assumptions about what sleep is necessary for and how much of it is truly essential. And this brings us to perhaps the deepest question raised by dolphin sleep, a question that takes us to the very edge of our understanding of consciousness itself. Consciousness at the border. What does it mean to be conscious when only half your brain is awake? This isn't just an academic question. It cuts to the heart of what consciousness is, where it comes from, and how it relates to the physical substrate of the brain. For humans, consciousness feels unified. You experience yourself as a single being, with one stream of awareness, one perspective on the world. Your left brain and right brain work together so seamlessly that you never experience them as separate. You are one you, not two yous taking turns. But a sleeping dolphin presents a very different picture. One hemisphere shows EEG activity characteristic of unconscious, slow-wave sleep. The other shows activity indistinguishable from waking consciousness. If consciousness emerges from brain activity, then it would seem that half the dolphin's brain is conscious and half is not. So is the dolphin half conscious, 100% conscious with reduced processing power, two separate consciousnesses taking turns, something else entirely? There's no easy answer. Part of the difficulty is that consciousness itself remains deeply mysterious. Despite decades of neuroscientific investigation, we can identify neural correlates of consciousness, brain states that seem to correspond to conscious experience. But we don't actually understand how subjective experience arises from physical processes. Why does it feel like something to be a brain? Why isn't neural processing just blind computation, input and output, with no inner observer? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, and it remains unsolved. Dolphins add another layer of complexity to this problem. If consciousness is produced by the brain as a whole, acting as an integrated system, then how can it persist when half that system is functionally offline? But if consciousness is produced locally by individual brain regions that can operate independently, then maybe each hemisphere has its own consciousness, its own subjective experience, and unihemispheric sleep is simply one consciousness, sleeping while the other remains awake. There's some evidence that might support this second interpretation. Studies of humans who have undergone surgical sectioning of the corpus callosum, the main bundle of nerve fibers connecting the two brain hemispheres, have revealed fascinating splits in consciousness. These split brain patients sometimes behave as if they have two separate minds. The left hemisphere, which typically controls speech, might express one preference, while the right hemisphere, controlling the left hand, acts out a different preference. Asked what they want to eat, they might say chicken, but their left hand reaches for fish. The two hemispheres, no longer able to communicate normally, pursue independent goals. If human hemispheres can develop such independence when surgically separated, might dolphin hemispheres be naturally more independent? Their corpus callosum is small relative to brain size, perhaps reflecting reduced interhemispheric integration compared to terrestrial mammals. Their enlarged posterior commissure might coordinate sleep-wake states without requiring the hemispheres to share detailed information about ongoing experiences. But there's another possibility, one that preserves the unity of dolphin consciousness despite the split sleep pattern. Maybe consciousness isn't produced by the whole brain at all. Maybe it emerges from specific structures or circuits, and those structures remain active in the waking hemisphere during USWS. The sleeping hemisphere might be offline, not contributing to conscious experience, but consciousness itself continues uninterrupted because the necessary machinery is still running in the awake side. In this view, a sleeping dolphin would be fully conscious, not half conscious. It would have complete subjective awareness, just with reduced processing capacity, like a computer running on half its processors. Slower, perhaps, but still fully functional, still running the same programs. Evidence for dolphin self-awareness adds another dimension to this puzzle. Dolphins have passed the mirror self-recognition test, a commonly used indicator of self-awareness. When marked with paint and shown their reflection, dolphins investigate the mark, showing that they understand the image represents their own body. They also demonstrate what researchers call body awareness, a detailed understanding of their physical form and its capabilities. In one elegant study, a dolphin named Alele was taught arbitrary gestures representing different body parts: rostrum, mouth, melon, dorsal fin, pectoral fin, belly, genitals, tail. When shown a gesture, she had to perform an action with that body part. She succeeded 90% of the time with familiar actions and 68% with novel tasks she'd never tried before. This suggests she has a mental representation of her body, what's called a body image, and can consciously access and control specific parts. But here's what makes this relevant to the sleep question. If a Lele has unified body awareness, a sense of self that encompasses her whole physical form, then presumably her consciousness is also unified. She's not experiencing herself as two separate entities, one on the left and one on the right. She's one dolphin with one sense of self, even though her brain can split its sleep states. Dolphins also demonstrate sophisticated social cognition. They track the attention of others, understanding when someone is watching them versus looking away. They seem capable of what psychologists call theory of mind, understanding that other individuals have their own mental states, their own perspectives and knowledge. They attribute agency and intentionality to others, predicting behavior based on inferred mental states. This kind of social intelligence typically requires metacognitive abilities, the capacity to think about thinking, to reflect on mental processes rather than just undergo them. And metacognition, in turn, suggests a fairly sophisticated form of consciousness, one that's not just experiencing moment to moment, but has some awareness of itself experiencing. So dolphins seem to be quite conscious in the ways we can measure. They're aware of themselves, they're aware of others, they can reflect on their own knowledge and uncertainties, they can plan and remember and imagine. All the signatures we associate with rich conscious experience are present, and yet half their brain sleeps at a time. Maybe the lesson here is that consciousness is more flexible, more divisible, more modular than we've assumed. Maybe the unified feeling we have as humans, that sense of being one indivisible self, is actually something our brains construct, a useful illusion that smooths over the inherent modularity of neural processing. And maybe dolphins, with their split sleep, experience consciousness in a less unified way than we do without experiencing it as diminished. Or maybe consciousness is like a flame. It doesn't matter if the fuel is coming from one log or two, from one hemisphere or two. As long as the flame is burning, as long as there's sufficient brain activity of the right kind, consciousness persists. The sleeping hemisphere doesn't make the flame smaller. It just means less fuel is being consumed, but the light still shines just as bright. These are, of course, speculations. We cannot ask dolphins about their subjective experience. We cannot know what it feels like from the inside to be a dolphin with one brain hemisphere sleeping. That knowledge may be forever beyond our reach, lost in the unbridgeable gap between species. But we can observe what dolphins do and how they do it. We can measure their brains, their behaviors, their responses to the world. And from all of that, we can piece together a picture, incomplete and surely inaccurate in some details, but a picture nonetheless of what it might be like to live at the border between sleeping and waking, never fully one or the other. Conclusion. So here we are at the end of our journey through the twilight consciousness of dolphins. We've explored the mechanics of unihemispheric sleep, understood some of the evolutionary pressures that shaped this remarkable adaptation, puzzled over the mystery of dreams that may or may not exist, and touched upon the profound philosophical questions raised by a mind that never fully sleeps. What have we learned? We've learned that sleep is not one thing, but many things. It serves multiple functions: thermoregulation, energy conservation, cellular maintenance, memory processing, perhaps others we haven't yet identified. And those functions don't necessarily require a single unified sleep state. Dolphins show us that you can distribute sleep across space and time, letting each part of the brain rest in turn while maintaining continuous consciousness. We've learned that the boundary between sleeping and waking is more permeable than we might have thought. We tend to think of these as discrete states. You're either awake or asleep, conscious or unconscious. But dolphins blur that boundary. They're neither fully awake nor fully asleep. They exist in a state that has elements of both, and they seem to thrive there. We've learned that dreaming, or at least REM sleep, might not be as universal or as essential as once believed. If dolphins and fully aquatic cetaceans can flourish without it, and if fur seals can go weeks without substantial REM with no ill effects, then whatever functions REM serves must be either dispensable or achievable through other means. This doesn't diminish the importance of dreams in our own lives. They remain a profound part of human experience, but it suggests the brain is more adaptable, more capable of finding alternative solutions than we'd imagined. We've learned that consciousness is stranger and more varied than human experience alone can teach us. A dolphin's consciousness, shaped by the demands of aquatic life, organized differently at the neural level, expressed through a split sleep pattern we cannot directly relate to. That consciousness is real and rich, even though it's foreign to us. And this should make us humble about our claims to understand consciousness fully, or to define it based solely on our own experience. We've learned that newborn dolphins and their mothers accomplish something that seems impossible by terrestrial mammal standards. They remain continuously active for weeks without suffering the catastrophic consequences we'd expect from severe sleep deprivation. This challenges our assumptions about how essential sleep is for development and suggests that marine mammals have evolved compensatory mechanisms we're only beginning to understand. And perhaps most fundamentally, we've learned that there's no single right way to sleep. Evolution has crafted many solutions to the problem of how to rest without dying. Dolphins' solution, radical as it seems to us, is just as valid, just as successful as our own. They've been refining it for millions of years, and it works beautifully for their needs. But our exploration also leaves us with questions, deep questions, questions that may never have final answers. Do dolphins dream? We still don't know. If they do, their dreams must be utterly unlike ours. Split between hemispheres, divorced from the REM state, integrated into a form of consciousness that never fully surrenders to sleep. Or perhaps they don't dream at all, and the function we associate with dreaming is accomplished through other neural processes we haven't identified. What is the subjective experience of unihemispheric sleep? We can describe the behavior, the brain waves, the physiology, but the feeling, what it's like from the inside to be a dolphin at rest, remains mysterious. Is there even a unified dolphin experience to speak of? Or does each hemisphere have its own private awareness? How much of what we think we know about sleep's functions is really specific to the way terrestrial mammals sleep? Dolphins force us to question every assumption. Memory consolidation. Clearly, dolphins consolidate memories without bilateral REM sleep. Synaptic homeostasis happens somehow despite reduced sleep time per hemisphere. Brain detoxification, apparently achievable through unihemispheric slow wave sleep alone. Every function we've proposed for sleep, dolphins challenge us to reconsider. Looking forward, research continues. Neuroscientists are developing better tools for monitoring brain activity in free-swimming dolphins. Technologies that might finally capture those elusive micro-REM episodes, if they exist. Comparative neuroanatomists are examining the cellular and molecular differences between dolphin brains and terrestrial mammal brains, searching for clues about what makes USWS possible. Cognitive scientists are designing ever more sophisticated tests of dolphin intelligence, memory, and awareness, trying to understand how their unusual sleep affects their mental capabilities. And philosophers are grappling with what dolphin consciousness tells us about consciousness in general. If minds can be this different, this alien in their organization and operation, while still being rich and aware and sophisticated, what does that say about the nature of mind itself? Perhaps there are as many ways to be conscious as there are ways to be alive. Perhaps consciousness is not one phenomenon, but a family of related phenomena, all recognizably about subjective experience, but varying wildly in their implementation. For those of us who aren't dolphins, all of this might seem distant, irrelevant to our daily lives. But I would suggest otherwise. The more we learn about how other species experience the world, the more we understand about the range of possibilities for consciousness, experience, and mind. We're trapped in our single human perspective, unable to step outside our own skulls and see what other forms awareness might take. But by studying other species, we can at least glimpse the diversity of minds, the many ways evolution has solved the problem of creating beings that can experience, feel, remember, anticipate, and respond. Dolphins, with their split consciousness and twilight sleep, remind us that there are other ways to be, that the human experience, familiar as it is to us, is just one small part of a vast landscape of possible experiences, and that the universe is richer, stranger, and more wonderful than we could ever imagine if we only looked at ourselves. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, that familiar surrender to darkness and dreams that is uniquely mammalian and yet unique in its details to our terrestrial heritage, spare a thought for the dolphins. Out there in the ocean, drifting through the night with one eye closed and one eye open, half their mind at rest and half on watch. They're experiencing something you and I will never know. They're living at a border we cannot cross, in a state between sleeping and waking that is theirs alone. And maybe that's beautiful. Maybe that's exactly as it should be. Different species, different solutions, different ways of being alive and aware in this strange and ancient world. Thank you for joining us tonight on this exploration of the secret dreams of dolphins. If you enjoy this journey into the mysteries of sleep and consciousness, please consider leaving a like and subscribe for more explorations of animal minds and the wonders they contain. Until next time, sleep well, or at least sleep as well as your terrestrial mammal brain will allow. Sweet dreams, whatever form they take for you.